Hello, everyone. As you continue to join us, welcome to our Tandem's live event with HR at the heart as our theme. As you can see, some of you are on camera. Claire Daly, I see you there. Just so you know, you're aware, this is actually a meeting. Tara, I see you as well. Welcome. Hello, Fiona. Welcome to everyone who's joining us today on our live event. We have been running these events over the last 3 weeks. This is our third event, and we've been getting a great response. And one of the things we've been asked to do is maybe make these sessions a little bit more interactive with those who are attending. So this is just like any Zoom meeting, just a few more people than we're used to, I guess. But what we can do is open the floor up to you as well as we go through this presentation from our guests today. We are going to talk about the power of values as a foundation in times of uncertainty. And I know there's going to be lots of discussion around this today. We're all encountering different versions of this in our own working lives today. And I'm really interested to hear what our guests, Aisling Tayard, CEO of Tandem, and Jim O'Brien are going to discuss today about the power of values with our theme, HR at the heart. So just to kind of give us a sense of things today, we're going to begin with a poll, but even before we get into the poll, not everyone is totally familiar with Zoom. We're certainly getting to know it better as we run these events. One of the things that is really kind of handy in Zoom is that you can give feedback without actually speaking sometimes, and that's the reaction button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So not to assume everybody knows what that is, how about everybody just gives me a bit of a round of applause there or a thumbs up, just to get into the spirit of things as we start to get into this. So the reaction button is a way that you can give us feedback, but actually a really great way to give us feedback is actually to speak as well. We're going to have about 10 minutes or 15 minutes of discussion around this topic. But what we're hoping is that will open a wider discussion because we don't have all the answers and there's a lot going on. I'm sure that your experiences and what you have been seeing yourselves is going to contribute to this community at large. And that's essentially what we're trying to do, is build a community during this troubling time and looking at a foundation for the future for HR as well. So without going on for much longer, I'd just like to launch this poll. You should see the poll pop up on your screen there. You can select whichever one of these you'd like and just see which ones pop out to you as interesting to you. And once you've voted on which one of these is relevant, so what we're looking for is, how does your organization currently use values? And the answers that you can choose are to clarify expectations around behavior, as a guide or platform for coaching conversations, as a performance metric in performance management, to guide or inform internal selection decisions, or to guide or inform external recruitment decisions, as a platform to shape a desired culture or employee experience, or to support employer branding, or finally, other. And if you answer other, be prepared to tell us what that other is, if you wouldn't mind. We'll give you about, I suppose, 10 more seconds to answer this, and then we can end the poll and continue on with our discussion. So just click on whatever answers are relevant to you, up to 3, and then we'll end the poll. Great. Okay, I'm just going to end the poll now. Thanks for your answers, and I'll share the results with all of you. So what we see is that clarifying expectations is coming up pretty high at 45%, but a huge surge in answers here for as a platform to shape a desired culture and employee experience, which is a very interesting departure point for our guests to launch into our discussion today. So I will introduce our guests today, Jim O'Brien and Aisling. If you guys are ready to go, fire away.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Jim here, obviously. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Looking forward to a good conversation. Some of that conversation between Aisling and myself, I'm hoping that a significant part of the conversation can be with you guys as well. So please, as Andrew said, please feel free to chip in your thoughts and observations. So that's an interesting outcome to our initial poll. It's one that I had hoped for and probably had predicted. Would have been very disappointing had it been a very low score, because the area that I really want to explore with you initially is the area of culture. So maybe before rushing too far into this, maybe I should allow Aisling space to say hello too.
Hey everybody, I'm going to join in the discussion later, but I'm leaving you in Jim's very capable hands for now to bring some framework to the discussion.
Thank you, Aisling. So starting with this idea of culture, and it's really reassuring that over 80% of the respondents saw their values as what I'm describing as an anchor for culture, because values often represent the beliefs that the organization has, and those beliefs should be manifested then in terms of the employee's experience of culture in the workplace. So we know that culture matters, and we don't need to revisit all of the research around the impact of culture on engagement and hence organization performance. But I'm just going to briefly touch on research by, in fact, ex-colleagues of mine in the Hay Group, or now Corn Ferry, as they're now called, where they actually were able to quantify some of the impact. So, for example, the impact of culture, of all of the factors that influence engagement and performance, they identified that up to 30% of that sits within this sphere of culture, which is not surprising, particularly if you define culture in this way. It's not a fact. It's the perception that people have of what it feels like to work around here. And those perceptions in turn influence discretionary effort. But I guess the even more interesting part is where do those perceptions of culture come from? And in their research, the Hay or Corn Ferry guys identified that leadership behaviors was a primary driver. And again, in their research, they quantified the impact. So of all of the factors that create perceptions of culture, 70% of those were the leadership behaviors demonstrated at all levels. It's not just CEO and senior executive leadership behaviors. This research went down to the level of teams and the behaviors of team leaders. So these are a dominant influence on the perceptions of employees in any organization in terms of their perceptions of the culture, what it feels like to work around here. And specifically, it's the behaviors rather than the words of those leaders. It's not what leaders say, it's actually what they do that influence those perceptions, which won't be a surprise to any of you in the world of HR. So let's reflect on what all that means, I suppose, and what evidence we have of that in these current troubled times, I guess. So in terms of some examples of leadership behaviors that we have seen or heard about, I start with from my own perspective and some anecdotal evidence. We've definitely heard of some leaders in certain organizations. And particularly, I think this is true of leaders that have come into the role of leadership from some technical or functional specialization. That remote working has actually encouraged them to retreat back to their core expertise, which is the task. Whereas you have other leaders who have taken a quite different tack, and in these times of stress, where there's a lot of uncertainty and concern amongst employees, their behaviors have been entirely different. They have ramped up their one-to-one interactions, even though with people working remotely, that's a little more difficult to I guess in our own experience in Tandem, I certainly noticed how very early in the COVID experience, Aisling herself initiated remote working before there was any lockdown. So it was an entirely optional piece, and immediately initiated morning check-ins for the whole Tandem team that helped people to check in not just with their leader, but with each other. So some examples of behaviors that have come to the fore, because I think what COVID has done is it's probably put a magnifying glass on the behaviors of leaders that, whether they intend to or not, are absolutely influencing the perceptions of employees as to whether their culture in their organization is really built on the espoused values, or whether, once you scratch the surface, the culture actually reflects different values than those that the organization espoused. So Aisling, I've name checked you there, but I'm inviting you to share any examples you have seen of how leaders have behaved in ways that are clearly shifting the culture.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that name check, so thank you for the surprise. But yeah, I mean, I think where values have really come to play and to focus in the past couple of weeks is that actually the values have become increasingly transparent now of how companies are reacting to this. And it's almost going viral now if a leader behaves exceptionally well or exceptionally badly during this time, you know. And there was that infamous case now of, you know, the guy who let half his team go on his 20-minute Zoom call and forgot to invite some of them along, so they heard through their peers and so on. And it's gone so viral to the world how his behavior, that in fact his customer base and everybody has reacted to it, you know, versus the leaders who equally have to let people go but are handling it in the more sensitive, individualized way. Okay, they're still doing it on Zoom, but they're doing it in a sensitive manner. And I think the values are becoming more and more transparent to the external world, whether our leaders are holding the company values to account or not. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to consider as HR leaders, that almost there's an onus on us that we navigate our leaders through this to live our values despite the hugely challenging circumstances they're going through, because there isn't a leader out there who's got all this sussed. Well, maybe the leader of Zoom, but other than him, I think most leaders are struggling through this whole era on how they're going to emerge their businesses and position them for the best way out of it. And actually, whether they live their values through that period or not, I think will be very transparent, not only to their internal employee base, but indeed to their external customer base as well. So for me, they've never been more important.
Which is really interesting, given that many organizations have worked very hard in recent years to in a sense, publicize their values as a way of I guess, clarifying the promise to prospective employees of the culture and the work experience they can expect when they join that organization. So those leaders behaving in ways that are in conflict or at conflict with those values must be very damaging for them. So at this point, maybe it's time for another poll, but this one will be a little shorter than the last one. So we're just curious to see, have you guys seen those differences in leadership behaviors across your leadership populations in your organizations? And have you seen the resulting impact? Because if this model is correct, it suggests that the behaviors that leaders choose to use at this moment in time should impact on people's perceptions of the culture and the perceptions of their organizations. So let's pop up the poll now. And so can I invite you to respond with a yes or no answer to each of the two of these questions.
The poll should have popped up on your screens there, everyone, and we'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer, and then we'll wrap up the poll and we'll continue. I'd say that'll be enough for a yes or no answer, guys. Let's wrap up the poll there, Seth, and we can see what the results are. The results were that we have seen significant differences, huge in favor of that 77% say, yes, we have seen a significant difference across our leaders. And then 85% say there's evidence of a different impact as a result, which I'm sure there are stories around that that everyone can share, but that's a very interesting result. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. That's very interesting. And in a moment, we'll be very happy for any of you that are willing to share what some of those differences are. But maybe just before we go there, we might look at what are the drivers of those behaviors that we're seeing being demonstrated now, for good or for bad? Where are they coming from? And so I want to go back to the model that we looked at just a moment ago, and to maybe take a step upwards. So if we finished with the leadership behaviors last time, let's start there this time around, and then look at the two dominant drivers of the choices leaders make in terms of which behaviors they demonstrate at any moment in time. So the first is their perceptions of what their job actually is, their perceptions of whether their role is to be the super task expert that role models how to do it, or whether their role perception is that actually they have an important role in creating the culture within their teams across their businesses that will deliver a positive outcome in terms of the perceptions of what it feels like to work here, and in turn will deliver the positive business results that should follow. So the perceptions leaders have is one of the two big drivers. And the second one is that the characteristics of those leaders, their DNA as I'm describing it here. So again, this is the personality type and personal values, of course, of these leaders that will also influence their choice around leadership behaviors. So the philosophy here is that, of course, the organization can espouse can espouse values, can encourage leaders to demonstrate certain behaviors. But underneath that, there are these powerful subconscious drivers of behavior. And I guess at times of stress, these are far more likely to come out than they might be when everything is rosy. So again, in this regard, Aisling, in your experience, what are the things you've observed, I suppose, that companies have tried to do to ensure the leadership behaviors are aligned with the company's values, but at times when this falls apart a little bit?
Yeah. I think we see it amongst our client base for sure, and beyond actually, within the wider HR network, that they're experiencing different impacts of how their leaders are reacting to the crisis and how they're living their values. And there's some lovely examples of leaders who've really taken their values very seriously and really put it out there that, we say, that engagement matters, that we're a caring organization and we want to hear from you, and we want, and opening themselves up and changing like classical processes like your classic engagement survey into a COVID pulse survey, for example, and kind of reshifting the whole focus on employees' well-being as opposed to how are we doing as an organization, which is usually the center stage of an awful lot of engagement surveys. And are we caring enough? Is there more interventions you want to see from us? So we've seen some lovely examples of clients really stepping up to the mark, very much led by the CEO, navigated very heavily by HR, I would say, but still having great reactions from their people on it too. So like there's some really super examples out there. There was one of our clients actually put together this whole learning and development initiative for their people, so that for the folks who had a bit of downtime and actually wanted to invest in growth and development, that they could do that. But they didn't just open it up for their employees, they opened it up for their employees and their whole families, which is just a lovely gesture, not a massive expense and not a massive burden for them to do, but actually resonated so well with their people. So I think there's some lovely examples coming to the fore of where they're trying to make their values come to life. You know, we had one organization has been really pushing feedback very hard for the past year and pushing a feedback culture. And, you know, the CEO coming out and being very open and saying, you know, we'd love to hear your feedback on how we're doing as an organization as we navigate through this. So there's been some really moments where you think that actually culture can make a big shift as a result of all of this. But equally, you hear the opposite, don't you? I mean, I think everybody knows that the horror stories always travel quicker than good news stories. So you see equally the CEOs that maybe haven't handled it to their best, and those values that their organization might paint on a wall or put on a website are most certainly not being lived throughout this period. And I think, you know, it doesn't serve us well to focus on the negative, particularly when I think there are so many amazing moments of people who are living up to their values, and actually more so now than ever before, and in a way that their employees finally understand that value, whereas they mightn't have done before. So I do think it's cutting through an awful lot of the noise, and people are really checking us against how much are we living our values, because it's so much more exposed now, isn't it? Because if your manager isn't living up to your values, you could go and have a rant with your favorite peer colleague. You could go and have a coffee and blow off some steam with somebody in the canteen. But all of those frills and things that masqueraded our frustration before, they're all gone. So if you have a manager who's not living the values, you just get off a Zoom call and you're on your own with that. So the frustration kind of doubles up, because you feel like, okay, gosh, he talks about, you know, my well-being, but he has me working a 20-hour day right now. You know, how great is that? And I'm just off for a Zoom call where he's added more work into the, and despite my protests that I need to be homeschooling and I need to be doing other things. So like all that frustration that you might have got rid of in the workplace, because maybe you went for a drink with your colleagues and had a laugh about him or whatever in the past, that's all gone now. We have no frills left to masquerade those frustrations. So when people aren't living the values, it's all the more transparent, I think.
So
actually, just one of the things we'd like to maybe do is to open it up to discussion now, because obviously these sessions are 30 minutes long, and there's an awful lot to discuss. So, you know, we can always follow up afterwards and stuff. Get an echo there. So what I'd like to do is maybe go back to the poll here and talk about some of the stuff that came up in the poll around this being a platform, values being a platform for shaping desired culture and employee experience. And that example you've given, Aisling, of those old tool sets and those things that might have equipped you for a bad meeting or a bad day at the office, that you'd go and have a coffee and blow off a bit of steam. Is anyone encountering that? And what are the other things that you're using as a platform to shape desired employee experience at the moment, when you don't have that direct access, you can't take people for a coffee? What are the kind of things that you're doing today to handle all of that? Don't jump all in at once. The line is open. And the people I can see are Claire Daly and Fiona Rowley, and Tara Nolan was on earlier. So if any of you guys want to jump in, please do.
I feel the need to jump in then, because I was the first name called. Look, I think there's a lot of tiredness going on as well. Like, we've all heard of Zoom fatigue, and people are actually working a lot more longer hours and more intensely as well, because I think we're all trying to prove that we're still busy even though we're working from home, because there's a little element of, if you work from home you mightn't be as productive. So I think we're all trying to show that we can work our best at home. It doesn't matter where the environment is. But back to the fatigue piece, people are tired, and you know, it's hard to switch off from, you know, your home life because you're upstairs in an attic room, and then, you know, be focused on work as well. So it's trying to find that balance. But I think back to your point on how can you, I suppose, offload the pressure, or if you're feeling a little bit gloom on a certain day, is still to reach out to your contacts. So be it your friends or your colleagues, to still pick up the phone. Like, people, even though they're not in the office with us, they're at the other end of the phone, and people are still very receptive and want to listen. And look, I'm in a HR role in a startup company, and we have 4 new joiners in the coming weeks, and there's a lot of nervousness both on the employer and the employee side about bringing them on board, and will they feel welcomed into the fold. So I think it's just about making that extra effort and just pushing yourself outside of your own boundaries as well.
Yeah, I think you're bang on, Claire. It's sometimes the most simple things that will make a difference. It's those reach out calls that are not about work, but just about how are you doing, that make all difference. That that checking in with you, just how are you. And we see, like, a lot of the managers, funny, we saw a real spike in engagement over the last few weeks on things like check-ins and feedback. And it was literally that. It was literally just people reaching out going, I just want to check in on how you're doing, which is really nice that it's not always about work. I think those things are important right now.
And we've started having virtual drinks on a Friday. And the first Friday was a little bit awkward and people didn't know how to engage. But now they've turned into really good fun. So, I think once we get used to kind of this way of working, people are starting to present themselves as they would in the office.
Yeah, and I would say I'd add to that, just on, whilst there's the employee experience and the work experience, what I'm also seeing, I'm seeing a wide spectrum, I suppose, covered in terms of behaviours. Both the check-ins have increased, and some have. That has been a very positive thing for most people. For others, where behaviour was bad before all of it and the check-ins have continued, that has been a cause of anxiety, because they perceive it as something different. So it's how they're managing that as well, and to try and find those other people that they can lean on when they perceive those managerial check-ins as micromanaging, rather than how are you getting on. And I think that's where we all need to reach to our wider organization for those. But I've also seen customer relationships have changed in terms of where the values would have been, all about the customer experience, but really, did people feel it in the real sense? And whereas now I think there's a greater, because companies have been humanized a little bit and their difficulties have been humanized, I think there's a really stronger sense of empathy from the organizations that offer a service that really, really want to help now, in a really true sense. And I think that's been a really positive thing.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's really helpful. And the earlier part of your answer there, Fiona, I thought was really interesting in terms of you reflected on the use of the check-in. So the check-in being effectively, you could say, a business process, but the experience of the employee would have been entirely influenced by how the leader, and that might be their team leader, actually handled the check-in. So the how it was done would have had a far more significant impact than the fact that it was done.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Which kind of brings us back to the drivers. What's the leader's perception of what's important at that stage? Is it the performance progress, or is it the emotional circumstances? And again, does their own DNA take them towards the human side, or does it take them away from it?
I think that's a really nice point at which to complete our event today. Jim, thank you so much for your contribution today. Aisling as well, thank you so much. And most importantly, thank you to all of our guests and people who joined us on our event today. It was, again, a very interesting discussion. We'll be following up with all of you again during the week with a recording of this session. And of course, make sure to log in again next Tuesday and tell your friends that we'll be having this every week for the next couple of weeks. So thanks again to everyone, Jim, Aisling, and all our guests. We'll see you again next Tuesday at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, bye.